Hi, and welcome to episode 5 of the She Built This podcast. Today, I want to talk to you about how it isn't always about the food or the workout. Now, that might sound a little bit strange coming from somebody who has made a living out of helping people to find the right workout, the right food to consume, and the way to train that optimizes their health. Now, that is true. It is a bit of a strange thing to say. And having spent the last nearly 30 years in wellness in one form or another, it has become increasingly clear that one aspect of the whole spectrum of health cannot be responsible for health in total. And as I have delved into this over the last few years, I have been able to take a little step back, and now I'm able to deliver to you hopefully some perhaps eye-opening information around how we can view health and how I now take the approach of creating wellness within my own life and within the life of my clients, because it really isn't all about the food and the workout. And the more you think about it, the more obvious it becomes, because if that were the case, if it were only down to having the right food and the right training, then we would all be super, super healthy. And realistically, you can Google that or go to ChatGPT and ask them to create you a diet plan and an exercise regime that will deliver those outcomes. So why are we not all following it, and why are we not all seeing the outcomes that we want to see? So I want to hopefully give you some insight into what else is going on and how I work with people to illuminate areas and shine a light on things that they can improve or change, or how we can work with that. So if we take a step back for a moment and zoom out and think about health and wellness in a more holistic way, and if I was able to, I would draw you a diagram now with a circle and 4 quarters on. And if we take the 4 quarters being physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, and we divide those up into those quarters, all of a sudden it becomes blatantly obvious that we are really only focusing on a quarter of health, in inverted commas, when we are talking about food and exercise. Because actually, when you look at the other 3 quarters, the other 75% of what's going on when we look at health, it has very little to do with the physical. However, they are all linked because we are one being, obviously, and so they are all interlinked. And when you think about the physical and spiritual, they sit more into the sort of the nervous system realm. And when you think about the mental and the emotional, they sit more into the endocrine system realm. Now, we can talk more about nervous system, endocrine system another time. The other thing I will also highlight is that when we look at perhaps physical and mental health, we're perhaps leaning more into our masculine energy. And when we're looking at our spiritual and emotional health, we're leaning more into our feminine energy. Now, as I've discussed on other podcasts, you have masculine and feminine in both women and men. This is not women and men. This is masculine and feminine. But what you can find is, particularly if someone is leaning quite a lot into their masculine energy, that physically and mentally they are either very on it with their exercise and nutrition and their mental health, but perhaps sometimes lacking in their emotional and spiritual health, because they are perhaps neglecting some of the sides that perhaps feel softer, in inverted commas. Again, there's a lot of kind of words I use that are kind of, I don't like, but I can't think of a better word for it. But they can appear softer, the feminine side. And then you have people who perhaps lean a little bit too much into the spiritual and emotional side, perhaps not quite enough into that physical, mental, masculine energy. And the balance of all of that is quite difficult to achieve. I hold my hands up and say I'm very much more into the masculine energy. I'm a doer. But what that means is that my spiritual and emotional energy gets very, very drained because I don't work them out very often. And so this is definitely something that I've lent into more over the last few months, is that's perhaps more nurturing side of understanding that there is a bigger thing going on when it comes to wellness. So ticking the boxes when you come to your food and your workout is great. You may end up looking the way that you want to look. And certainly I've gone down that path where I've gone, okay, cool, I've got abs, but I hate my life. And it really isn't worth the sacrifices of missing out on your daughter's birthday cake, for example, or saying no to every single social event because you are watching your calories every single day. So there comes a balance. However, you can swing too much the other way and be too much into your kind of social stuff that you are neglecting some of the fundamentals around food and exercise. So there is the balance to be struck. But what I will say is that it is very much more a case of looking at these other aspects and how can we support those. So, for example, you've got your food and exercise falling really nicely into that physical. So if we move then into the mental health, there's so much talk around looking after our mental health and how we do that, and that I think is individual for most people. And so for some people it will be going for a walk, for some people it will be sitting and playing a game of FIFA, and some people it'll be talking, and some people it'll be having time when they can reflect and be quiet. And so looking after your own individual mental health is key, and working on it in the same way that you would work on your physical health. And then when we look at the spiritual side of things, I think a lot of this falls down to, say, some people might be fairly religious, for example, and that sits very nicely into our spiritual health. And there's a lot of evidence around where we look at these sort of blue zones with the high percentage of centenarians. I think that's the word for the people over 100 years old. That sounds about right. It's something like that. But there's a higher percentage of people in certain areas in the world who do live to be over 100, although some of the data is a little bit weird around there. But I think we can all agree when you look at some of the countries that are deeply religious, they do tend to have a higher, perhaps a higher percentage of people who are over the age of 100. So there is something around there. And I'm not saying that it has to be religion. It is a part of, it's perhaps exploring some of the areas around seeing something outside of yourself. And even if it's not something outside of yourself, that maybe it's a part of you that can be explored. That self-reflection, that time for, meditation, or any of those aspects where you can explore the less tangible aspects of life. And I think that probably even is enough to just kind of to allow that to happen and to not see it as something that is pointless. Because what's the point? Well, actually there's quite a lot of point, because it's fundamental to our well-being, and particularly when you're looking at longevity. So that would be a very key area to look at, and certainly an area that I personally am spending a lot more time exploring. And then when you look at the emotional health, it's self-reflection and taking time to allow feelings to move through, to feel the feelings, to accept that they are part of the human experience, that you are going to feel those feelings, and perhaps scratch the surface as to, why is this feeling coming up? Have I experienced this feeling before? What does it actually mean? And there's a key question that I not only ask myself, but I ask my clients regularly. And that question is, what are you making this mean about you? So there's a really interesting saying around, it's not the first arrow that kills you, but the second. That meaning that it's not the thing as such. So it's not the thing that person said to you that is annoying you. It's actually, what are you making that mean about you? What story have you told yourself about that thing that is actually the thing that's really getting your goat? And that can play into the emotional side. So where we've perhaps got triggers, things that make us fly off the handle, that, and I think particularly, I notice with the ladies that I deal with, for example, who are either going through the menopause or through the menopause, where our estrogen has gone down, which is our caretaking hormone, which is our kind of caregiving. We put up with a lot more when we have a nice dose of estrogen. And when we don't have that estrogen around, we're like, I don't think I'm willing to put up with that quite so much anymore, which is where our different personality starts to come through, I think, when we go through that stage of our lives. And that is part of it. So it's that kind of, okay, what am I actually making this mean? And now I've been triggered in a way that perhaps I wasn't triggered before. What does that mean? And that time for self-reflection and time for thinking. And you can see how this doesn't have very much to do with food and exercise. However, it has everything to do with food and exercise, because once you kind of go, okay, I'm actually knee deep in a pile of Hobnob biscuits because I'm really pissed off with the way that person spoke to me. I'm going to instead of eating my own body weight in Hobnob biscuits, I'm going to think, okay, why am I really pissed off with that way that person spoke to me? And is there something that I can do myself that isn't eating Hobnob biscuits? And then you kind of look, okay, all of a sudden, it's not quite so difficult to stick to the diet or the nutrition, the way of eating. And it just becomes who you are and what you do, as opposed to this I'll start again on Monday type talking that we do to ourselves, where we're kind of like, why do I keep doing this? Well, you keep doing it because there's so much more going on than getting the right nutrition plan. And whilst getting the right nutrition plan is wonderful and key, and if you can stick to the bloody thing, it will serve you well, but also remembering that there are lots of other elements that we have to address in order for that to stay in place. And you can make this mean, this can be the same for pain, it can be the same for anxiety, or lots of things where we're kind of like, there's so much at play that the one thing on its own is never the one thing. And I think it's one of the key aspects that I am using now to create this wellness journey for people, where we go through checking in with ourselves on a regular basis in a specific way, and we check our state, for example, like what am I feeling, how am I feeling, like literally what am I feeling in my body, what am I feeling in my emotions, what am I, where am I sitting? Because if actually today would be the better day to just do some gentle yoga, cool. Or am I actually feeling a little bit like I need to get some energy out? Great, let's go for a really great workout. But noticing those things, and then when you're not constantly pushing this narrative of I have to do this workout because it's written here, or I have to eat this way because that's, the brain is not going to accept those that for very long, because eventually you'll just go, well, I'm not doing this anymore, it's ridiculous. And that's where it all starts to fall down. So we start to unpick. So there's layers, basically. So you look at the layers of, let's get the top, like in the best circumstances, what would be the best way to eat and work out? Cool. Because based on where you are as an individual and what your needs and requirements are and what your goals are. And then we look and we strip it back and we go, okay, so what are we actually trying to work on here? And what's the edge of the sellotape that we need to pull back in order to get this to work? And then we look at the bigger system, and we look at the physical, we look at the emotional, we look at the mental, we look at the spiritual, and we try and shore up all of those things so that we move forward with all of them together. We lean into the masculine energy, we lean into the feminine energy. We look at the endocrine system, we look at the nervous system. Are all of these systems working together? We look at the digestive system. What's going on there? The digestive system and the brain are so intrinsically linked. So when you look at the nervous system, endocrine system, digestive system, so intrinsically linked. The gut brain axis is physical and emotional and mental. It's the reason you get butterflies in your stomach when you're a bit excited. You have a actual physical thing that goes from one to the other, and you have this this emotional connection, feeling things in your gut. There's a reason for that saying, right? So I'm going to leave you with that to think about how are you going to, over the next few days, look at supporting not only your physical health, but your mental, your spiritual, your uh, emotional health as well. And what small things can you bring in? If you would like more information, please jump in and get in touch. There's a lot more to dig in with this, and I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I will see you next time.